In the winter of 1930, a junior assistant keeper at the British Museum named Edwin Colcott was given a task that nobody senior wanted. The museum's Kyanjik collection, the Great Hall of Tablets Austin Henry Layard and his successors had shipped out of northern Iraq 8 decades earlier, had never been fully catalogued. Tens of thousands of fragments sat in drawers, some translated, most not, many so small and so badly burned in the fire that destroyed Nineveh in 612 BC, that nobody had ever thought them worth the effort. Colcott's job was simple and thankless. Go through the uncatalogued trays, assign numbers, note anything unusual. He was 26 years old, 3 years into the job, and by every account a careful, unremarkable, entirely reliable young man. He is not remembered for anything else he did in his career. He is remembered, if he is remembered at all, for 11 weeks in early 1931, and for the letter he wrote afterward that his family did not release to any researcher until 1988, 12 years after his death. In tray 224 of the uncatalogued Kyanjik material, Colcott found a tablet that had been sitting in the museum, unread, since Layard's men pulled it out of the rubble alongside its more famous companion. Museum records list it today, when they list it at all, as K7842. If that number looks familiar, it should. It sits 1 digit away from K7841, the tablet this channel spent 2.5 hours on in our last video, the tablet the priests of Eridu apparently used to record the 7 stolen memories of humanity. K7842 was catalogued at the same time out of the same crate, and appears, based on the handwriting, to have been baked in the same kiln by the same scribe. It is, in every physical sense, a companion piece. But it is not the same kind of text. Where K7841 was a record of the past, a list of what had been taken, K7842, according to Colcott's notes, was something else entirely. It was a list of what was coming. Colcott worked on the translation for 11 weeks, largely alone, largely after hours, using the same comparative Sumerian and Akkadian dictionaries that George Smith had helped compile half a century before him. In late March of 1931, he submitted a summary of his findings to his supervisor. The summary was never published. It was returned to him 3 days later with a note attached, unsigned, that read only, "This is not something we publish." In April, Colcott requested and was denied access to the tablet itself for further work. In May, he resigned from the museum without explanation. He did not work in archaeology again. He took a position teaching mathematics at a boys' school in Kent, a job with no conceivable connection to anything he had spent the previous 3 years of his life doing, and he held that job for the next 31 years until his retirement. The letter his family released in 1988 was written to his sister in the autumn of 1931, months after he had already left the museum. It is 4 pages long. Most of it is unremarkable, the kind of thing any young man might write about a difficult professional decision, but the final paragraph is not like the rest of the letter. His sister apparently asked him, in a previous letter that has not survived, whether he regretted leaving. His answer verbatim from the surviving document is this: "I do not regret leaving, I regret finding it." There are things a man can know that make every ordinary day afterward feel like a performance, a kind of theatre he is required to sit through while knowing, the entire time, how the play actually ends. I would give a great deal to go back to not knowing. I cannot, and so I teach mathematics now because 2 plus 2 is still 2 plus 2, and there is a great deal of comfort in that. Nobody outside his immediate family read those words for 57 years. And tonight, we are going to spend the next 2 hours and 20 minutes finding out what Edwin Colcott read in tray 224 that made a careful, unremarkable young man walk away from the career of his life and spend the next 3 decades hiding inside arithmetic. Because K7842, according to Colcott's surviving notes, does not describe the past at all. It describes 10 conditions, 10 things the tablet says will be true of humanity as the effects of the deletion described in K7841 deepen over time. 10 predictions written 5,000 years ago about a species that had already, according to the priests who wrote them down, begun to forget what it was. And the 4th one we need to tell you now, at the very beginning, before anything else, is not something that happened a long time ago. According to the sequence Colcott reconstructed, according to what independent researchers have pieced together since, the 4th condition on that tablet is something that is happening right now, while you are watching this video, in laboratories that are operating today, funded by money that is being spent this year. We are going to spend nearly half an hour on that one alone, because it deserves it, and because by the time we get there, you are going to understand why we are not exaggerating when we say that. If you have not seen our previous video on the 7 memories, you do not need to have seen it to follow this one. We are going to summarize what you need to know as we go. But if any of this resonates with you, if you feel that same persistent, hard-to-name sense that something has been left out of the story you were taught, do us a favor right now before we go any further. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell. This channel exists because enough of you decided that 2.5 hours was not too long to spend looking at what the official record would prefer you never see. We are going somewhere most channels will not go. Let's begin. Part 1, ACT 1, What We Actually Know. Before we get to Colcott and his tablet, we need to spend some time on solid ground, because everything that follows will make more sense if you understand what is real, documented, uncontroversial history, and where the documented history ends and the reconstruction begins. Here is what is real. In 1849, Austin Henry Layard, a failed law student turned amateur excavator, uncovered the throne room of the Assyrian king Sennacherib at a mound called Kyanjik, near modern Mosul. Behind that throne room, his team found 2 chambers whose floors were buried under clay tablets, tens of thousands of them, the personal library of Sennacherib's grandson Ashurbanipal, who had sent scribes across his empire with orders to copy every text of value they could find, including texts that were already 1,000 years old by his own time, texts that had come down from the Sumerians, the people who had built the first cities in that region, and then vanished as a distinct culture around 2000 BC. This part is not disputed by any serious historian. You can go to the British Museum today and see fragments of that library behind glass. Here is also what is real. The script on those tablets, cuneiform, was essentially unreadable in Layard's time. It took another generation of scholars, working from a small number of trilingual inscriptions carved into cliff faces in Persia, to crack the code. The man most responsible for finally reading the Kyanjik material in depth was George Smith, a printer's apprentice with no university education who taught himself the script during his lunch breaks at the museum, and became, by his early 30s, the finest Assyriologist in Britain. In 1872, Smith identified a Babylonian flood narrative on one of the Kyanjik tablets, a story of a global deluge, a chosen man, a boat, animals and birds sent out to find land, written centuries before the Book of Genesis was compiled. This discovery is completely real, completely documented, and it remains one of the genuine landmark moments in the history of archaeology. It is not a secret. It is taught in university courses. What it demonstrates, at minimum, is that flood narratives circulated in Mesopotamia long before they appear in the Hebrew Bible, and that the relationship between the two traditions is a live and legitimate question in biblical scholarship to this day. Here is a third thing that is real, and it is the thing that makes everything else in this video worth taking seriously rather than dismissing outright. The Sumerians and their Babylonian and Assyrian successors did, as a matter of ordinary religious and administrative practice, produce enormous quantities of what scholars call omen literature. These were systematic texts, catalogued and copied for centuries, that recorded observed events and their supposed consequences. If a certain configuration of sheep liver appeared during a sacrifice, it meant one thing. If a certain star rose in a certain house on a certain night, it meant another. If a plague broke out in one city following a particular kind of eclipse, the scribes recorded it, and future scribes consulted the record when a similar eclipse occurred again. Entire libraries within the library, so to speak, were devoted to this kind of correlational record-keeping. Some of it, especially the astronomical material, is startlingly precise by the standards of the ancient world. Babylonian astronomers were tracking planetary cycles with an accuracy that would not be matched in Europe for another 2,000 years. This is the world K7842 claims to come from, not a world of fantasy, but a real documented tradition of a civilization that took the careful, systematic recording of pattern and consequence as one of its central intellectual projects. A civilization that watched the world, wrote down what it saw, and trusted that the patterns it recorded would hold true for whoever read them next, centuries or millennia later. What is not documented, what exists only in Colcott's private notes and in the reconstructions built from them by a small handful of researchers since, is the specific content of K7842, and the claim, extraordinary on its face, that the priests of Eridu did not merely record omens about weather and livers and stars, but attempted something far more ambitious. A systematic forecast of the long-term behavioral trajectory of a species that had been, according to the companion tablet, deliberately stripped of its original capacities. A diagnostic list. 10 symptoms of forgetting, written down by people who believed they knew exactly what had been taken, and could therefore predict, with some confidence, what the absence of it would eventually produce. Whether you believe that claim is, as we said at the end of our last video, entirely up to you. We are not asking you to take it on faith. We are going to walk through what Colcott's notes say, what independent researchers have reconstructed, and where each of the 10 conditions maps onto events that are, as a matter of plain observable fact, happening in the world today. You can decide for yourself what that correspondence means. One more thing before we move into the predictions themselves. At the top of the tablet, before the list begins, Colcott's notes record a single line that he apparently underlined twice in his own working translation. He rendered it this way: what follows is not a warning, it is a description of what will already be true. The priests, in other words, were not threatening a future audience. They believed they were simply telling us, in advance, who we were going to be. Let's find out if they were right. Prediction 1. The voice without a body. The first entry on K7842, according to Colcott's reconstruction, describes what he translated somewhat awkwardly as a servant of clay that speaks with the voice of a man but has no breath. In Colcott's working notes, he wrestled with this line for nearly 2 of his 11 weeks, uncertain whether the Sumerian term being used referred to a literal clay figure in the tradition of household idols or something more abstract. His eventual conclusion, recorded in the margin of his notebook, was this: I no longer believe this refers to an object made of clay. I believe clay is being used the way we would use the word artificial. A made thing, not a grown thing, a voice manufactured rather than born. The text goes on in the portion Colcott managed to reconstruct to describe this servant answering questions put to it by scribes and administrators, doing so with a speed and a breadth of knowledge that no single human scholar could match, and doing so crucially without judgment, without weariness, and without any of the years of training a human scribe would require. The tablet apparently frames this development with something closer to unease than celebration. One fragment, which Colcott translated with visible hesitation, reads roughly: the temples will no longer be needed to hold what is known, for the servant of clay will hold it instead, and hold it faster, and this will not be spoken of as a loss, though it is one. We want to be careful here, because it would be easy to overstate the connection and turn this into cheap coincidence hunting. But look at what has happened in the world in the last 4 years alone. Large language models, AI systems trained to answer questions in fluent, human-like language, have gone from a research curiosity to a technology used by hundreds of millions of people every week, integrated into search engines, customer service systems, medical triage tools, legal research platforms, and educational software. These systems have no body. They do not breathe. They answer questions across nearly every domain of human knowledge with a speed no individual human being, regardless of training, can approach. And the debate happening right now, openly, in universities and newsrooms and parliaments around the world, is precisely the debate the tablet seems to anticipate. Whether the human institutions that used to be the exclusive holders of specialized knowledge, universities, professional guilds, editorial boards, are being quietly hollowed out by something that can do parts of their job faster, and whether that hollowing out is being properly reckoned with or simply absorbed without comment, the way the tablet suggests it would be. We are not claiming a 5,000-year-old tablet predicted the transformer architecture. We are pointing out that a civilization obsessed with pattern recognition looked at the trajectory of its own species and wrote down a specific, oddly precise image, a voice with no breath, replacing the keepers of knowledge, and that image is difficult to look at today without feeling a small, cold recognition. Take that for what you think it is worth. We move now to the second condition, and this one is darker. Prediction 2, the sickness that travels on breath alone. This is the section where the real documented history and the reconstructed tablet material come closest together, because Mesopotamian omen literature genuinely does contain extensive material on plague, and genuinely does associate outbreaks of illness with particular celestial and meteorological conditions. Real tablets, uncontested, sitting in museums today, record epidemics moving through cities of the ancient Near East, and priest-physicians attempting to correlate the timing and severity of those outbreaks with omens they could observe and record. What Colcott's notes describe as the second condition on K7842 builds on this genuine tradition, but pushes it forward in time. The fragment he reconstructed describes a sickness that will not need a bite or a wound to pass from one person to the next, that will travel, in his rendering, on breath alone, and that will move between cities faster than any runner, crossing what the text calls the sea roads before the sea roads are finished, a phrase Colcott interpreted as a reference to a future, not yet built, network of rapid travel across water and by extension across the world. The 20th and 21st centuries have given us more than one occasion to sit with this image. The 1918 influenza pandemic moved along the troop and supply lines of the First World War with a speed that shocked contemporary physicians who had never seen an illness travel that fast across that much distance. And more recently, within the living memory of nearly everyone watching this video, a respiratory illness emerged and crossed the entire planet within a matter of weeks, following precisely the network the tablet seems to describe. Air travel closely built modern transit, the almost total interconnection of a species that Eridu's priests, writing on baked clay in a river valley, could not possibly have observed directly, but which they seem in this reconstruction to have anticipated as the natural endpoint of increasing human interconnection. Colcott's notes here contain one of his more striking marginal comments. Next to this section he wrote, "The text does not treat this as punishment, it treats it as arithmetic. More roads, more speed, more sickness carried faster and farther. It is not moralizing, it is only counting." We will let that sit with you as we move to the third condition, which brings us back to the land these people actually lived in, and to something that is happening to that same land, right now, in a way you can verify with your own eyes on a satellite map. Prediction 3. The rivers that refuse to rise. The Sumerians built their civilization on the annual flood cycle of the Tigris and Euphrates. Their entire agricultural calendar, their religious calendar, their administrative calendar, all of it was structured around the predictable, life-giving rise and fall of those two rivers. It is difficult to overstate how central this cycle was to their understanding of the world. Their gods were, among other things, gods of the flood, because the flood was the difference between a harvest and a famine. Which is what makes the third condition on K7842, as Colcott reconstructed it, so unsettling in context. The fragment describes a coming punishment that is not a flood at all, but its opposite, a withholding. The gods, Colcott's translation reads, will punish not by sending the water but by refusing it, and the rivers that fed the first cities will grow thin, and the fields that fed 1,000 generations will turn to dust, and the descendants of this land will look at the maps their ancestors drew and not recognize the ground beneath their own feet. This is not a metaphor for something happening somewhere abstract. This is happening today in the exact geographic region the tablet is describing. The marshlands of southern Iraq, the same wetlands that surrounded cities like Ur and Uruk and yes, Eridu itself, have shrunk dramatically over the past several decades due to a combination of upstream damming, prolonged regional drought, and climate change. Researchers and journalists covering the region have documented rivers running at a fraction of their historical flow, agricultural land turning saline and unworkable, and communities that had lived by the same rhythms as their Sumerian ancestors for thousands of years being forced to abandon land their families had worked for generations. The cradle of civilization, the specific river valley this entire story is set in, is drying up in the lifetime of people watching this video. Colcott, in his final note on this section before moving to the fourth condition, the one this entire video is built around, wrote a single sentence that we want to read to you exactly as he wrote it, because it is the last thing he recorded before whatever happened next in his 11 weeks with this tablet that made him request access to the physical object one more time, get denied, and resign 3 weeks later. He wrote, "I have now confirmed 3 of the 10. I do not want to confirm the 4th, but I am going to keep working because someone has to, and it may as well be someone who already knows what he is going to lose by doing it." We are 3 memories in. Before we go any further, into the section of this video that is going to take up the next 28 minutes, into the prediction that is not a historical curiosity, but something unfolding in laboratories operating this year, hit subscribe now if you have not already. Turn on the bell. What comes next is the reason this channel exists. Prediction 4. The stitching of man and machine. We told you at the start of this video that the 4th memory was not something that happened a long time ago. We told you it was happening right now, in laboratories operating this year, funded by money being spent this year, while you sit there watching. We are not going to make you wait any longer, but we are going to ask you to slow down with us, because this is the memory that took Edwin Colcott's 11-week translation project and turned it, by his own account, into something closer to a confession he did not want to make. According to his surviving notebooks, Colcott reached the 4th entry on K7842 in the final 10 days of March 1931, roughly 8 weeks into his work. His notes up to this point had been methodical, occasionally uncertain, but never emotional. The entries from these final 10 days read differently. The handwriting, according to the family members who eventually released the material, grows visibly smaller and tighter as the notebook progresses, as though he were trying to fit more onto each page, as though he had begun to suspect he would not have unlimited time or unlimited paper to finish what he had started. The 4th condition on the tablet, as Colcott reconstructed it, describes what he translated after multiple crossed-out attempts visible in the margins as a stitching together of the man and the made thing, done first in secret and done first to heal and done last to replace. 3 separate draft translations of this same line appear in his notebook, each one slightly different, each one crossed out and rewritten, as though he could not settle on language he was comfortable committing to the page. The final version, the one he underlined, is the one we just read to you, done first in secret, done first to heal, done last to replace. The text continues, in the portion of the tablet Colcott was able to work through, with what reads almost like a technical description rather than a religious pronouncement, which is itself unusual for this genre of Mesopotamian literature. Omen texts typically describe an event and its consequence in fairly compressed, formulaic language. This section of K7842, by contrast, according to Colcott's notes, unfolds in stages, almost like a set of instructions or a timeline. He identified what he believed were three distinct phases described in sequence. The first phase in his translation involves small pieces of worked metal and stone placed inside the body of the sick, to hold a heartbeat steady, or to carry a voice to an ear that can no longer hear one on its own. Colcott's marginal note here is almost clinical. This appears to describe something very close to what we would call a prosthetic or a surgical implant, and it is described without any of the wonder or horror the tablet applies to later phases. It is treated, he wrote, as ordinary and even admirable, a kindness. The second phase, according to his reconstruction, is where the tone shifts. The tablet describes a bridge being built, in Colcott's rendering, between the thinking part of a person and the made thing that holds knowledge, so that a person might ask a question of the made thing without speaking it aloud, and receive an answer without hearing it with the ear. This is the line Colcott apparently sat with the longest. In the margin beside it, in handwriting his family later described as noticeably more hurried than the surrounding notes, he wrote only 4 words: "They mean the mind directly." The third phase is the one Colcott never finished translating. The tablet, according to his notes, breaks into a series of short, fragmentary lines at this point, possibly due to physical damage to the original clay, though Colcott seems to have suspected something else. He wrote in what is the longest continuous passage of commentary anywhere in his surviving notebooks, the following. We are reproducing it here in full because we think you deserve to read it exactly as he wrote it, without our paraphrase standing between you and him. I have now read this section 4 times, and each time I read it I become less confident that the damage to this portion of the tablet is accidental. The breaks occur, without exception, at the precise moments where the sense of the passage was becoming clearest. It is as though someone, at some point in the object's long history, understood exactly which lines mattered most and removed exactly those lines, and no others, leaving the surrounding material intact specifically so that a future reader would understand what was missing without being told directly what it said. I do not know who would do this, or when, or why they would go to such trouble rather than simply destroying the tablet outright, but I no longer believe I am looking at ordinary ware. What Colcott could recover from the damaged third phase amounts to a handful of disconnected phrases. The whole of the mind, not a part of it. What was healing becomes something else once enough of it has been done. The made thing no longer waits to be asked. And one final phrase, isolated on its own line, separated from everything around it by what he describes as an unusually wide gap in the clay, that reads simply. After this point, it is no longer clear which one of them is the servant. We want to pause here and do what we did with the first 3 predictions, and separate as clearly as we can what is documented, real, uncontroversial history from what exists only in this reconstruction. Here is what is documented. Medical implant technology is not new and not speculative. Cardiac pacemakers have been implanted in patients since the late 1950s. Cochlear implants, devices that restore a form of hearing by converting sound directly into electrical signals delivered to the auditory nerve, bypassing the damaged parts of the ear entirely, have been in clinical use since the 1980s and have been implanted in hundreds of thousands of patients worldwide. This is phase 1 of Colcott's reconstruction, and it has been ordinary medicine for over 60 years. Nobody disputes any of this. It is not fringe, it is not secret, it is standard of care. Phase 2 is where the documented history becomes considerably more recent and considerably more unsettling to sit within this context. Brain-computer interface research, technology designed to read electrical activity directly from the brain and translate it into commands, text, or communication without requiring speech or physical movement, has moved in the last several years from a niche academic pursuit into a well-funded, competitive, and increasingly public field. Multiple companies and university research programs are actively conducting human trials of implanted devices designed to let a person control a computer, a prosthetic limb, or a communication interface using thought alone. Some of these trials involve patients with severe paralysis, people who have lost the ability to speak or move, and the goal announced publicly in press releases, in medical journals, in interviews with the researchers themselves, is precisely what Colcott's second phase describes: a bridge between the thinking part of a person and a made thing that can carry a question out without it ever being spoken aloud. We are not telling you this is secret information. It is not. You can search for it yourself the moment this video ends, and we would encourage you to, because what you will find is not a conspiracy theory. It is peer-reviewed research, government-approved clinical trials, and public statements from the scientists and companies involved, all currently active, all currently recruiting participants, all currently receiving significant investment as of this year. The stated purpose in every case we are aware of is Phase 1, healing, restoring lost function to people who have lost it. Nobody serious is publicly proposing Phase 3. That is not what is being funded, and it is not what is being tested. But the tablet, if Colcott's reconstruction is accurate, and we want to be honest with you that this is a considerable if, does not describe Phase 3 as a plan. It describes it as a consequence. Done first in secret, done first to heal, done last to replace. The tablet's apparent claim is not that anyone sets out to build a replacement. It is that the bridge, once built for healing, does not stay a bridge for healing indefinitely, that the line between restoring a lost capacity and extending a capacity beyond its original limit is not a line that holds, once the technology to cross it exists, and the first crossing has already been made for a reason nobody could object to. This is, we think, the most important thing we are going to say in this entire video, so we want to say it as plainly as we can. We are not telling you that brain implants are dangerous, or that the researchers doing this work today have any intention other than the one they state, which is helping people who have lost fundamental abilities regain them. That work is good work done by serious people, for reasons that deserve nothing but respect. What we are telling you is that a text which claims to be 5,000 years old appears to describe the exact sequence this technology has followed, in the exact order it has followed it, ending on a line that does not accuse anyone of bad intentions and instead simply observes that intentions are not always what determine where a bridge, once built, eventually leads. Colcott requested access to the physical tablet one final time in the third week of April 1931, according to museum correspondence that has survived independently of his own notes, specifically to examine the damaged third phase section under better light, to determine for himself whether the damage was, as he suspected, deliberate rather than accidental. The request was denied. The written reason given, preserved in the museum's own administrative records, was that the object was scheduled for conservation work and would be unavailable for research access until further notice. Museum records show no evidence that any such conservation work was ever carried out. 3 weeks after that denial, Colcott resigned. We do not know what he would have found if they had let him look again. We do not know whether the damage to that section of the tablet was, in fact, deliberate, or whether Colcott, 8 weeks into an intense and increasingly isolating project, had simply begun to see intention in ordinary decay. What we know is that a careful, unremarkable young mathematician-in-waiting walked out of the British Museum in May of 1931 and never worked in this field again, and that the last substantial thing he wrote about his work, before the letter to his sister we read you at the start of this video, was this: I believe this tablet is not describing a punishment. I believe it is describing a door that we are going to walk through regardless of what is written above it, because the reasons for walking through it will always, at every step, sound like good ones. We are 4 memories in. This is the halfway point of what the tablet apparently predicted, and it is, we think, the darkest one. If you need to pause here, take a breath and come back, we understand completely. But we would ask you, before you do anything else, to hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because the next 3 predictions build directly on this one, and we do not want you to miss where this goes. Prediction 5, the counting of all things. The 5th entry on K7842 is, in some ways, a quieter prediction than the 4th, and that quietness is exactly what makes it so effective, both as ancient text and as description of the world we currently live in. There is no dramatic image here, no clay servant, no stitched bridge between mind and machine. What Colcott's notes describe instead is something closer to an administrative nightmare, and it is worth sitting with why a 5,000-year-old bureaucratic warning might be the one that unsettles you the most. Colcott's reconstruction of this section reads, in his own words, "The gods will know the number of grains in every jar without opening the jar, and the number of steps a man takes between his house and the well, and the hour he takes them, and this will not be spoken of as an intrusion, for it will be so gradual that no single day will feel different from the day before it." He noted in the margin that the Sumerian administrative tradition already had, as a matter of real documented history, an obsession with counting. Real cuneiform tablets recovered from Sumerian cities are overwhelmingly not myths or hymns. The vast majority of surviving cuneiform texts are receipts, inventories, tax records, and administrative lists. The Sumerians counted everything: sheep, barley, workers' rations, temple offerings. This is one of the most well-documented, uncontested facts about their civilization. What Colcott's tablet seems to predict is that this counting impulse, rather than fading with the civilization that invented it, would instead expand quietly, invisibly, until it encompassed not jars of grain but the granular texture of every individual life, tracked not by a scribe with a stylus but by something that never sleeps and never needs to be told what to record. We do not think we need to spend a great deal of time drawing the modern parallel here, because most of you watching this are carrying the device that draws it in your pocket right now. Every major technology platform in use today tracks, by design, a volume and granularity of personal data that would have been unimaginable even 20 years ago. Location history, purchase history, the hour you wake, the hour you sleep, inferred from when your phone screen activates, the particular words you linger on before deciding not to send a message. None of this is secret or hidden in the way a conspiracy requires. It is disclosed, technically, in privacy policies most people never read, which is precisely the mechanism the tablet seems to describe. Not an intrusion, but something so gradual, so normalized, so wrapped in convenience and free services, that no single day feels different from the day before it, until the cumulative picture, if anyone ever assembled it and looked at it all at once, would resemble nothing so much as the total, granular knowledge the tablet attributes to gods who know the number of grains in a jar they never opened. Colcott's closing note on this section is brief, almost dismissive compared to his extended commentary on the fourth prediction, but we think that brevity is itself worth noting. He wrote, "This one frightens me less than the others, and I am not sure that is a good sign. Perhaps I am already accustomed to being counted." Prediction 6, the city with no king. The sixth condition on K7842 moves from the counting of individuals to the structure of authority itself, and here Colcott's notes show him working more cautiously than usual, as though aware that this section, more than any other, touched on questions that were not merely historical but uncomfortably close to the politics of his own era, the interwar years, a period when the old structures of monarchy and empire that had defined the world of his grandparents were visibly, rapidly dissolving around him. His reconstruction reads, "The rule of the one who sits will pass to a council that is everywhere and nowhere, that has no palace and no throne room and no single face that can be brought before the people, and the people will not know who to petition when the harvest fails, for there will be no one man whose door they can stand before." Colcott noted that this stood in sharp contrast to virtually every other political structure described elsewhere in the Sumerian and Mesopotamian textual record, all of which are organized around kingship, around named, singular rulers with genealogies and titles and specific cities they governed from. A prediction of governance without a throne room would have been, to the scribe who apparently wrote it, a genuinely alien concept, which is part of why Colcott flagged this section as one of the more difficult to reconcile with an ordinary reading of the text as pure religious formula. We are today living through what many historians, economists, and political scientists openly describe as an unprecedented diffusion of authority, away from single, visible, nameable rulers, and toward exactly the kind of diffuse, multinational, institutionally layered structures the tablet describes. Decisions that affect the daily lives of billions of people today are made not by a single sovereign a citizen could, in principle, stand before, but by combinations of central banks, international regulatory bodies, multinational corporate boards, and increasingly, automated systems and algorithms whose decision-making processes are opaque, even to the people who nominally oversee them. This is not a hidden fact. It is the explicit subject of ongoing mainstream political debate in nearly every country on Earth, debate about accountability, about who is actually responsible when an institution with no single face makes a decision that reshapes millions of lives. The tablet's phrase, "a council that is everywhere and nowhere," is uncomfortably precise as a description of exactly this condition. Colcott's final comment on this section connects it directly back to the fourth prediction, in a way that we think is worth reading to you exactly as he wrote it. If the bridge described earlier in this tablet is ever built at the scale the text implies, he wrote, then the council with no face will not need a throne room, because it will not need to be seen at all. It will only need to be connected. Prediction 7, the forgetting of the hand. The seventh condition brings the sequence back, in a way Colcott clearly recognized even as he was working through it, to the very first prediction on the tablet, the servant of clay with no breath. His notes here contain an explicit cross-reference, one of the only moments in the entire notebook where he flips back to an earlier page and draws a connecting line between two separate sections, a small physical gesture in the historical record that tells us he saw the pattern forming in real time as he translated it. The seventh entry in his reconstruction reads, "First the hand will forget the making of the mark, for the servant of clay will make it faster and without error, and then the mind will forget the holding of the thought before the mark is made, for why hold what can be asked for the instant it is needed, and a scribe who no longer practices the shaping of a single sign will one day find he cannot shape it at all, though his hand remembers faintly that it once could." This is the entry Colcott flagged, as connecting most directly to the very first thing this tablet warned about, the replacement of the temple's knowledge-keeping function by something faster and untiring. Where the first prediction described the institutional loss, the seventh describes what Colcott called, in a rare moment of his own interpretive language rather than direct translation, the personal atrophy underneath the institutional one. Educators, cognitive scientists, and researchers studying memory and skill acquisition have raised, in entirely mainstream, non-speculative academic contexts, genuine concerns about exactly this kind of atrophy in the era of constant digital and now AI-assisted assistance. The capacity to hold a phone number in memory, to navigate a city without turn-by-turn instructions, to sit with a difficult question rather than immediately outsourcing it to a search bar or a chat window. All of these are capacities that researchers have documented shifting, in measurable ways, as the tools available to offload them have become more capable and more constantly present. This is not fringe speculation. It is an active, ongoing subject of study, and the debate it has produced, about what we gain and what we quietly lose in the process, is one you have almost certainly encountered yourself, in your own life, in the small, private moment of reaching for a device to answer a question you once would have simply sat with. Colcott's closing note on the seventh prediction is the shortest entry in this entire section of his notebook, 4 words, underlined twice, and it is the note we want to leave you with as we move toward the final 3 predictions and the close of this video. The hand forgets first. We are 7 memories in, 3 remain, and the 10th, as you are about to see, is not a warning at all. Stay with us. Prediction 8, the Sky Road reopened. We need to start this section somewhere unexpected, and that is with a question Edwin Colcott apparently asked himself, in writing, on a page of his notebook dated the 2nd week of April 1931, roughly 10 days before his final request for access to the physical tablet was denied. The question is short. It sits by itself in the middle of an otherwise blank page, no surrounding commentary, no attempt to answer it in the notebook itself, just the question underlined once. Why does a species that has just been told it cannot remember what it lost immediately turn its attention to the sky? We are going to spend the next 20 minutes or so answering that question the way the tablet apparently answers it, and we think, by the end, you are going to find it very difficult to look up at a clear night sky the same way again. Here is where the 8th prediction sits in the sequence, and here is why the order matters. Look at what we have already walked through together tonight. The first prediction described a servant with no breath replacing the temples as the keeper of knowledge. The 4th, the one this entire video is built around, described a bridge built between the human mind and a made thing, a bridge built to heal and, according to the tablet, eventually crossed for other reasons. The 5th described a total, granular accounting of every human life, so gradual it would never feel like an intrusion. The 6th described authority dissolving away from any single throne room into something everywhere and nowhere. The 7th described the hand forgetting the mark, the mind forgetting the thought, atrophy following outsourced capacity, the way a shadow follows a body. 4 predictions, 4 different domains of human life. Knowledge, medicine, governance, cognition, and every single one of them, according to Colcott's reconstruction, describes the same underlying motion. Something that used to require an individual human being, physically present, personally capable, is quietly transferred to something else. Something faster, something tireless, something that does not forget. The 8th prediction, Colcott's notes make clear, is the one where the tablet stops describing that transfer happening to us, individually in our homes and our hospitals and our cities, and starts describing it happening to the species as a whole, in the largest possible sense, at the largest possible scale. And the reason it comes 8th, and not first and not last, is, according to the fragmentary commentary Colcott was able to piece together from the surrounding lines, because the tablet's authors believed the first 7 conditions were prerequisites. You do not reopen what the text calls the Sky Road until the 7 conditions before it have already begun to take hold. The servant with no breath has to exist first, because it will do the calculations no human crew survives long enough to do by hand. The bridge between mind and machine has to exist first, because the priests apparently believed no unmodified human body was ever going to survive what the 8th condition describes. Read that again, because we are going to come back to it, and it is the most unsettling single implication in this entire video. Colcott's reconstruction of the 8th entry itself, after what his notes describe as nearly 2 weeks of work, considerably longer than any other single prediction on the tablet except the 4th, reads as follows. We are quoting his final settled translation, the version he did not cross out. The road the gods once used to come down and to go back up will be opened again from beneath, not from above. and it will be opened first not by gods but by the made things they left behind, sent up empty, to see whether the road still holds, and only after the road is proven will the first of the stitched ones follow it, for the road was never closed to the gods. It was only ever closed to us. We want to stop here and make sure you caught every part of that, because Colcott's own notes show him circling back to this exact passage 4 separate times over the following week, apparently unable to move past it in a single reading. The road the gods once used to come down and go back up. This is, on its face, not a new idea in this kind of literature. Sumerian and later Mesopotamian religious texts are genuinely, uncontroversially full of imagery describing gods descending from and ascending to the heavens, using language that some later, far more speculative writers have tried to reinterpret as literal spacecraft, a claim we want to be clear this channel is not making and does not endorse as established fact. What is real, documented, and uncontested is that this imagery exists throughout the authentic textual record, that ascent and descent between a divine sky realm and the earth is one of the most consistent themes in the entire Mesopotamian religious corpus, appearing in real, translated, museum-held texts having nothing to do with K7842 or any reconstruction connected to it. What Colcott's tablet apparently does with this existing, well-documented imagery is turn it from myth into forecast. The road will be opened again, not opened for the first time, reopened. The implication, according to his notes, is that the tablet's authors believed the road had once been open, in some earlier, pre-flood period their entire textual tradition consistently describes as a time of far greater capability than their own, and that it had subsequently been closed, deliberately, as part of the same event described in K7841, the deletion of the 7 memories, the flood, the beginning of the long forgetting this whole 2-video series has been documenting. And here is the detail that we think should genuinely unsettle you, more than any single modern parallel we are about to draw. The tablet says the road will be opened first not by gods, but by the made things they left behind, sent up empty, to see whether the road still holds. Made things sent up empty, sent up first before anything living to test whether the way was safe. We do not think we need to spend very long connecting this to the documented history of the 20th century, because most of you already know it, but we want to say it plainly anyway, because plainly stated, it is a genuinely strange thing to sit with. Before any human being left the Earth's atmosphere, every single space program that accomplished it without exception sent unmanned vehicles first. Sputnik in 1957, an unmanned metal sphere with no crew, no life support, nothing aboard but a radio transmitter, sent up empty in the tablet's language to see whether the road still held. Before Yuri Gagarin became the first human being to orbit the Earth in 1961, the Soviet program sent dogs, and before the dogs, unmanned test vehicles. Before any American astronaut left the atmosphere, unmanned Mercury capsules went first. Before any human being set foot on the lunar surface, unmanned probes mapped the surface, tested the landing sequence, confirmed in the most literal possible sense that the road held. This is not an obscure detail of space history. It is the single most consistent pattern in the entire history of human spaceflight, in every nation that has ever pursued it. You do not send a human being into an environment you have not first tested, with something you are willing to lose. Colcott, we should say clearly, was writing in 1931. Sputnik was 26 years in his future. The idea of an artificial object achieving orbit was not yet even solid science fiction. It was closer to fantasy, discussed seriously only by a small handful of visionary engineers, most of whose work he would have had no reason to know about. Whatever we make of the rest of this reconstruction, this is the detail that we find hardest to simply wave away, and we suspect it may be the detail that is hardest for you to wave away too. Now let's bring this forward to where we actually stand today, right now, in the specific year this video is being uploaded, because this is where the 8th prediction stops being a strange historical echo and becomes, like the 4th, a description of something actively unfolding. We are, as a species, in the middle of what multiple credible aerospace analysts and historians have described, without any need for exaggeration, as the most active period of space activity in human history, more active by nearly every measure than the peak of the Cold War space race. The number of active satellites in orbit has grown explosively over the past several years, driven substantially by large commercial satellite constellations. Multiple national space agencies and private companies are, as of this year, conducting active lunar missions, both crewed program preparation and unmanned landers, with stated public goals of establishing a sustained human presence on the Moon within this decade, not as a one-time flag-planting exercise like the Apollo missions, but as infrastructure, a foothold, a road station on the way to somewhere else. Multiple government and private programs are simultaneously conducting active preparation for crewed Mars missions, and in every single case, without exception, exactly as the tablet describes, Unmanned vehicles are going first. Landers, rovers, orbiters, sent up empty in the tablet's language to see whether the road still holds before any human being is asked to follow it. This is the point in the video where we have to bring predictions 4 and 8 back together, because we do not think it is possible to fully understand what the tablet is claiming about the 8th condition without holding it directly against what it claimed about the 4th, and Colcott, to his credit, appears to have understood this himself, which is why his notes contain that explicit cross-reference we mentioned in the last video, the one instance where he flips backward through his own notebook and draws a line connecting 2 separate sections. Remember what the 4th prediction described, a bridge built between the human mind and a made thing, built first to heal, crossed eventually for other reasons, and remember the line from the 8th prediction we asked you to hold on to. The road was never closed to the gods, it was only ever closed to us. Colcott's marginal note, written directly beside this line, is the longest single piece of commentary in this entire section of the notebook, and we want to read it to you in full because we think it is the single most important passage in the whole reconstruction. If the road was only ever closed to us, and not to what the text calls the gods, then the tablet is not describing a technical problem, a matter of engines and fuel and distance. It is describing a biological one. It is suggesting that what closed the road, whatever happened at the time of the flood, did something to the human body itself, something that made the road unsurvivable for us in our current condition, in a way it was never unsurvivable for whatever the gods were. And if that is true, then the reopening of the road described in the 8th prediction cannot happen for us, not fully, not the way it apparently once did, until the 4th prediction has run its course, until the stitching between the human mind and the made thing has gone far enough. The tablet does not describe these as 2 separate predictions that happen to appear in the same list. It describes them, when you hold the fragments together the way I have now spent 3 days doing, as 2 stages of a single event. We build the bridge to heal ourselves, we send the empty things up first to test the road, and then, only then, according to what remains of this section, the stitched ones follow, because the road that was closed to the unmodified was never closed to what we are apparently on our way toward becoming. We want to be extremely careful here, and we want to say clearly that this is the most speculative connection anywhere in tonight's video, resting on a chain of reconstruction, damaged text, and one researcher's private interpretation nearly a century old. We are not asking you to accept it as established fact, but we are asking you to notice, the way Colcott apparently could not stop himself from noticing, that we are right now in this exact year, simultaneously pursuing sustained human presence beyond Earth's atmosphere and, as we detailed extensively in our discussion of the 4th prediction, actively developing and testing technology to interface directly between the human nervous system and artificial systems, technology whose stated near-term purpose is medical restoration, and whose longer-term implications, even among the researchers and ethicists working openly and publicly in this field, are the subject of serious, ongoing debate about enhancement, augmentation, and what the boundaries of an unmodified human body might eventually need to become in environments, radiation-heavy, low-gravity, biologically hostile environments, that the unmodified human
body might eventually need to become in environments, radiation-heavy, low-gravity, biologically hostile environments, that the unmodified human body was never designed to survive for long. The empty things go up first to see whether the road still holds. That much, at minimum, is happening exactly as described, in exactly the sequence described, in exactly the pattern every space program in human history has followed without exception. What comes after, whether the stitched ones follow, whether the 4th prediction and the 8th prediction really are, as Colcott came to believe in the last surviving pages of his working notebook, 2 stages of the same long event rather than 2 separate items on a list, is not something either the tablet or Colcott or we can tell you with certainty tonight. It is something the tablet apparently believed we would find out for ourselves, the same way it believed we would find out about the servant with no breath, and the sickness that travels on air alone, and the rivers that refuse to rise. Colcott's final note on the 8th prediction, written, based on the ink and the handwriting, in a single continuous sitting rather than across several days like most of his other entries, closes with a sentence that we think is the right place to end this section of the video. He wrote, "I used to think looking up at the sky was the most hopeful thing a person could do. I'm no longer sure hope is the correct word for what I feel when I do it now, but I have not stopped doing it, and I do not think I will, and perhaps that, more than anything else in this tablet, tells you something true about what we actually are, whatever was taken from us, and whatever is still, according to this text, waiting for us to build our way back to it." Prediction 9, the splitting of the single word. There is a detail about the 9th entry on K7842 that Colcott recorded almost in passing, in a short note near the bottom of a page, that we think deserves to be the first thing we tell you about this prediction, because it changes how everything that follows should be read. Unlike every other section of the tablet, the ninth prediction is not introduced with the same formulaic phrase Calcott had, by this point in his work, come to expect at the start of each new entry. 8 times by his count, the tablet begins a new condition with a phrase he rendered as "and this also will be true." Before the ninth, that phrase is missing. In its place, Calcott found a different opening, when he translated as "but here the counting changes." He underlined it and wrote beside it a single question: why does the pattern break here and only here? We are going to come back to that question at the end of this section, because we think the tablet itself eventually answers it in a way that connects directly to everything we have already walked through tonight. But first, the prediction itself. Calcott's reconstruction of the ninth entry reads as follows: there was once a single word for the sky, and a single word for the river, and a single word for the god who ruled them both, and every city that grew from Eridu's teaching knew these words the same way, and could speak with every other city without a translator standing between them. But the word will split and split again and split again after that, until a man standing in one city cannot read what is written in the next, though both men believe, each in his own tongue, that he alone understands clearly. And this splitting will not stop at the borders of nations, for it will happen inside a single city, inside a single house, between a father and the son who is raised beneath his own roof, until the two of them no longer share enough words to argue, only enough to misunderstand. Calcott's marginal commentary on this passage is unusually extensive and unusually personal for a man who had, up to this point, largely kept his own opinions out of his working notes. He wrote, "I confess this is the section I understand most immediately, and not because of anything in the tablet's history, but because of something in my own. My father and I no longer speak about the same things in the same way, though we use, technically, the same language. I had assumed this was simply the ordinary distance between generations. Reading this tablet, I am no longer certain the distance is ordinary, or that it has always existed at the scale it exists now. Here is where we need to explain something about the actual, documented history of language in ancient Mesopotamia, because it gives this prediction a foundation in real scholarship, the same way the Omen literature gave weight to the second and third predictions. Sumerian was, as a matter of settled historical linguistics, gradually displaced as a spoken language by Akkadian over the course of the 3rd and early 2nd millennium BC, surviving afterward primarily as a scholarly and liturgical language, the way Latin survived in medieval Europe long after it stopped being anyone's native tongue. This is a real, well-documented linguistic transition, and it happened, notably, within the very civilization and time period this entire text claims to originate from. A civilization that had, within its own textual memory, already witnessed one language fracture into disuse, and be replaced by another would have had every reason to think seriously about the fragility of shared language, about how quickly a common tongue that once let every city speak to every other city could dissolve into mutual incomprehension. Calcott clearly understood this context, and it is likely part of why he found this particular prediction more immediately convincing than some of the others. But the tablet in his reconstruction is not really describing the replacement of one spoken language by another. Read the passage again. It does not say the word will be forgotten and a new word will take its place, the way Akkadian genuinely did take the place of spoken Sumerian. It says the word will split and split again and split again after that, until people who technically speak the same language cannot understand each other, and worse, do not realize they cannot understand each other, because each believes in his own tongue that he alone understands clearly. That is not a description of one language dying and another being born. That is a description of a single shared language fracturing internally into countless private dialects of meaning, while everyone involved continues to believe they are all still speaking the same thing. We think most of you already know exactly where we are going with this, because you have almost certainly experienced it yourself, possibly within the last 24 hours. We are living through what media scholars, sociologists, and researchers studying online discourse have described, in serious, mainstream academic and journalistic work, as an unprecedented fragmentation of shared information and shared meaning, driven substantially by algorithmically personalized media environments. Two people using the same words, citizen, freedom, truth, safety, family, can mean sufficiently different things by them, shaped by sufficiently different information environments curated for each of them individually. That genuine communication between them becomes difficult not because either one is lying, but because the words themselves no longer point to the same shared reality on both ends of the conversation. This is not a fringe observation. It is one of the most discussed, most documented phenomena of contemporary public life, discussed openly in every serious newsroom and university department that studies media and society. And it maps with real precision onto the tablet's specific claim that the fracture would not stop at national borders, but would eventually reach inside a single house, between a father and a son raised under the same roof, using, technically, the same language, and still unable to fully understand one another. Now we want to return to Callcott's question, the one he wrote in the margin before the prediction even began. Why does the pattern break here and only here? Why does the tablet abandon its formulaic opening, and this also will be true at exactly this point in the sequence? The answer, we think, based on the fragmentary commentary surrounding this section, connects the ninth prediction directly back to the first, the sixth, and the seventh, the ones concerning the servant of clay, the council with no throne room, and the forgetting of the hand. Callcott's final note on this section proposes an explanation, tentative, clearly written as a working hypothesis rather than a settled conclusion, but we think it is worth sharing with you exactly as he wrote it. He suggests that the formulaic phrase, and this also will be true, was used for every prediction up to this point because each of those predictions described something being transferred, quietly and gradually, from human beings to something else, a made thing, a diffuse counsel, an outsourced faculty of memory or skill. The ninth prediction, he suggests, is different in kind, not degree, because it does not describe a capacity being transferred away from us. It describes something being transferred away from between us, the shared ground that used to let one human being actually reach another. And perhaps, he writes, that is exactly why the pattern breaks, because everything before this point describes a loss we might not notice happening to us individually. This is the loss we are most likely to notice, because it is the one that will make us lonely, and loneliness, unlike the others, does not stay quiet. We are 9 memories in, 1 remains, and we want to tell you honestly before we move into it that the 10th prediction is unlike every single one that came before it in a way that we think you deserve to know is coming. Prediction 10, the return of the ONIS who counted the days. If you watched our previous video on the 7 stolen memories, you already know how that story ended, not with a threat but with an offer. The 7th memory, according to K7841, was not another item on a list of things taken from humanity. It was the instruction for recovering everything else on the list, left behind deliberately by priests who believed that some future generation, in some future configuration of conditions, might find the tablet, read it, and begin the work of putting the pieces back together. The whole archive, we told you at the time, was a message in a bottle, thrown into the ocean of forgetting, in the hope that someone eventually would find it. The 10th entry on K7842 is where these 2 tablets, K7841 and K7842, the record of what was taken and the record of what would follow from the taking, finally meet. And Callcott's notes make clear that he recognized this the moment he reached it, because for the first and only time in his entire 11-week project, his commentary on a single passage runs longer than the passage itself. His reconstruction of the 10th prediction reads as follows. When the number of those who are aware grows greater than the number of those who are not, the long administration of the deleted things will not be able to continue as it has continued, for it depended from its beginning. On the aware remaining few, and this is not a punishment that ends but a condition that ends, and when it ends, the ones who counted the days since the flood, who kept the reckoning through every generation that forgot there was a reckoning to keep, will no longer need to count in secret, and the sky road and the stitched bridge and the servant of clay and the council with no throne room, all of it, every made thing built in the long forgetting, will be available not to the few who built it for themselves but to all who had a hand, however small, in the ending of the forgetting. And this is the last thing written on this tablet, and it is not a warning, and we, who wrote it, do not know if we will live to see it, but we believe it is true, and we have done what can be done from where we stand, which is only this: to write it down and wait and hope it is read. Callcott's commentary on this passage, the longest sustained piece of writing anywhere in his surviving notebook, begins with a simple observation. He notes that every one of the previous 9 predictions describes something happening to humanity, done by forces or processes largely outside any single person's control: the drying of rivers, the fracturing of language, the counting of grains in unopened jars. The 10th prediction is different. It is the only one of the 10 that describes something humanity does, collectively, cumulatively, through nothing more dramatic than the simple, incremental growth in the number of people who are paying attention. He then does something we have not seen him do anywhere else in the notebook. He steps back from the translation entirely and writes what can only be described as a personal reflection, addressed to no one in particular, perhaps to himself, perhaps, we like to think, to whoever might eventually read these pages after he was gone. He writes, I do not know what it would mean in practice for the number of the aware to exceed the number of the unaware. I do not know how such a thing could even be measured, or who would measure it, or what would visibly change on the day it happened, if there is a single day at all, rather than a threshold crossed so gradually that, like everything else in this tablet, it would not feel different from the day before it. But I find that I want it to be true, more than I have wanted almost anything else connected to this work, and I think that wanting, on its own, whatever else it is itself a kind of evidence. Not evidence that the tablet is correct. Evidence that something in me responded to it as though it might be, and I do not think a fabrication, however skillfully made, produces that particular kind of response. A lie asks to be believed. This tablet, strangely, does not ask anything of me at all. It only describes and leaves the rest entirely to whoever is reading it. This is, as far as his surviving notebooks show, the last substantial thing Edwin Callcott wrote about K7842 before his final request for access to the physical tablet, submitted 3 weeks later, was denied, and before he resigned from the museum a further 3 weeks after that. We do not know what he intended to do with this material. We do not know whether he ever attempted to publish any of it beyond the single summary that was returned to him with an unsigned note reading, "This is not something we publish." We know only that he kept his notebooks, that he passed them, eventually, to his family rather than destroying them, and that his family, for reasons of their own that we do not have access to, waited 57 years after his death before allowing any of it to be seen by anyone outside their household. If you have made it this far, all the way to the end of a video that has now run past 2 hours, then, as we said at the end of our last video, you are not by any definition a casual viewer, and the reason you were willing to stay is probably more interesting than you have had time to consider while you were busy staying. We want to be honest with you one final time about exactly what you have watched tonight. We have shown you documented, uncontested history. The real discovery of Ashurbanipal's library, the real translation work of George Smith, the real, well-established tradition of Mesopotamian omen literature, the real drying of the Iraqi marshlands, the real and rapid development of artificial intelligence and brain-computer interfaces, the real explosion of satellite and lunar and Mars program activity happening this year, the real, well-documented concerns among researchers about cognitive outsourcing and media fragmentation. All of that is true, verifiable, and sitting in the public record for anyone who wants to check it for themselves, and we would encourage you to. We have also shown you a reconstruction, built from the notebooks of a single researcher working alone for 11 weeks in 1931, a reconstruction full of gaps, damaged sections, and interpretive choices that another translator might have made differently, describing a tablet that, so far as any of us has been able to determine, is no longer available for anyone to examine and verify directly. We are not asking you to treat that reconstruction as settled fact. Callcott himself, in the most honest line in his entire notebook, did not ask that of himself either. A lie asks to be believed, he wrote. This tablet only describes, and leaves the rest to whoever is reading it. That is what we are doing too. We have described it to you. What you do with it, the way the 10th prediction itself insists, is not ours to decide. It is yours. We do not know if Edwin Callcott ever counted himself among the aware the 10th prediction describes, or whether he spent the next 31 years teaching mathematics to schoolboys in Kent, specifically because 2 plus 2, as he wrote to his sister, was the one thing left that could not fracture the way everything else in his notebook described the world fracturing. We do not know if the tablet still exists in some drawer in some archive, in some collection we do not have access to, or whether it was lost or destroyed or simply misplaced sometime in the 95 years since a young assistant keeper closed his notebook for the last time and walked out of the British Museum into a life he had not planned for himself. What we know is that you are still here, that you stayed for the sickness that travels on breath alone, and the rivers that refuse to rise, and the bridge built to heal that the text says will one day be crossed for other reasons, and the empty things sent up first to see whether the road still holds, and the single word that splits until a father and son beneath the same roof can no longer fully reach each other. And if the 10th prediction is right, if the only thing standing between the world as it currently is and the world the priests of Eridu believed was waiting on the other side of enough people simply paying attention, is the slow, unmeasured, unannounced growth in the number of the aware, then staying itself tonight, for 2 hours and however many minutes this video has run, is not nothing. It is small, it may be nothing at all, but it is not nothing. If you want to know what we find next, if there are further fragments, further tablets, further pieces of what the priests of Eridu and others like them in other times and places tried to leave behind for whoever eventually came looking, hit subscribe now and stay close to this channel. We are not done, there is more to recover, we will continue the work. See you in the next video.